we're still finishing our lunch in the room, but we're going to go ahead and get started and move on to our next topic, which is treatment. So just like we did last time, we're going to start with some polling questions. The only answer choices that show up here are the ones that get the most results. So if it looks confusing because it's not the same as what's on your screen, that's why. But you can go ahead and vote on how many treatments have you or your child had to try in order to get control of your JIA. And so this could be, more than 10, fewer than 2, or maybe you haven't been able to get control, which is also an answer choice. Wow, that's a lot of people not able to gain control. That gives us our charge for sure, that we know we have some work to do. Let's go ahead and go to the next question. And this, I know, is going to be a big topic in our discussion together today. What has been your child's most troublesome side effect, or your most troublesome side effect, from treatment? And you've got several options there, including an other option if these are not the ones that speak to you. So everyone take a minute to cast their votes there. So it looks like the clear top 3 are needle phobia, issues with the injections or infusions themselves, but certainly susceptibility to infections is a big problem, and we hear frequently about nausea and vomiting, but certainly other side effects as well. So thank you from the back. You can put us back on our regular deck. And next we're going to hear from our treatment panelists. And here again, we have these folks here to really share their own stories to help kind of punctuate the data that we're seeing and talking about. They will all introduce themselves, so I'm going to turn it over to Liz for all 4 of our panelists, and then we'll have a large group discussion at the conclusion of the panel. So Liz?
Good afternoon. My name is Liz Smith. I live 20 miles down the road in Burke, Virginia, so I win the prize for the longest commute to this meeting. I'm a former preschool teacher, currently a preschool administrator and interim director of a job I didn't want. I've turned it down. And I've served on FDA advisory committees. I've served on the advisory council at the NIAMS, and I have just recently joined their clinical trials review committee. So that's, my first meetings are coming up in October. I have 3 kids with rheumatic disease, so you can see them up there. My son was not diagnosed as a child. He was diagnosed as a young adult, but his picture's there because the side effects were pertinent. Most of my focus will be on Emily, who is the nurse on the left, and then she's holding her baby sister in the lower picture. Emily was diagnosed when she was 2 years old with polyarticular. Then we were told psoriatic, and we've been told since then that she probably has overlapping, and she has a couple of other issues as well. Her diagnostic process was, in the grand scheme of things, pretty quick. We were in this area, and so we were fortunate to have a pediatrician whose close friend from high school, college, and medical school had gone into pediatric rheumatology here in DC. So we were able to get in very quickly. But it started with a fall in the swimming pool, swollen ankle, and they told us it was this, told us it was that, told us it was the other. And then one day her brothers came to us and said, Mommy, Emily's giving us the finger. Well, my daughter was 2 years old. So she didn't know what that meant. And of course, I looked at my boys and said, why do you know what that means? So that was when we realized that her finger didn't bend and other things were happening, and we went back to the pediatrician, and lo and behold, our 2-year-old had arthritis. We were asked to talk a little bit about the worst times. For us with Emily, that was when she was 7 years old. We had had stability for 4 years on just a DMARD and an NSAID. Life was really good. She was doing things again, functioning. So her doctor said, let's stop her meds. That was before, I think, there had been a lot of study into whether or not children should be weaned or should stop abruptly. So we stopped her meds, and we had these 3 absolutely glorious weeks. No drugs, nothing. We could just pick up, we could leave our house, we could do what we wanted to do. And then she woke up on New Year's Eve and couldn't get out of her bed, getting ready to turn 7 years old. She couldn't participate in activities anymore. She couldn't keep up with her friends. She was 7 years old, and I was thinking of this as Nick was talking, thinking, wow, but at least she was only 7, not 16 or 17, when I was dressing her and helping her in the bathroom, and her teachers were taking her to the bathroom at school because they had to take her into the staff restroom in order for her to be able to use the toilet at school. So we went through this roller coaster ride of getting her stable again. She's now, as you can see from the picture, a nurse. She works full-time. She loves her job. She's doing beautifully. She's never been in remission, but, drugs are good. What can we say? We like drugs in our house. Sophie, the one on the right, started having symptoms of joint pain when she was in late middle school, and then ended up with a chronic disease that involves arthritis. So that was bad. One of the things that I will say about Emily is that we've been through multiple drugs. She started on a DMARD, then she went to Biologic A, severe side effects, and then it lost its efficacy, so we went to Biologic B. 3.5 years on Biologic B, life was wonderful, and then efficacy started to decline. We went to Biologic C, and she had 7 absolutely amazing years on that. But her skin was a mess. So they took her off that biologic and put her on drug D, and her skin cleared up, no signs of psoriasis at all, but her joints went to hell in a handbasket. So it was back to Biologic C, which no longer worked. So she's now on the 5th drug, and she's been doing very, very well on that. But it has been a problem. They put her on that last one because as she was starting her nursing career, going in there for her HR appointments, I was driving her because she could not actually turn her head to be able to safely drive her vehicle. She wanted to go, I think, into the emergency room as a nurse. She did her practicum in the ER and loved it. But she couldn't do it because that's not really conducive when you have arthritis. She needed something where she could lift her patients. And as a postpartum nurse, most of her patients weigh less than 10 pounds, so it's very doable. I think with all of this, one of the things I really want to say is that we have to remember that this disease is not one size fits all. And sorry, I'm skipping things because she gave me my 3-minute warning. It's a challenge. It's not a one size fits all thing. It's a guessing game. Emily's life was very heavily impacted by arthritis, physically and emotionally, knowing that we couldn't do the things, we couldn't travel. When her dad was still on active duty, we came back up here to DC when he was assigned to another duty station because he was going to deploy, and I needed to be somewhere with family and friends and a good support network because I had 6 kids and I couldn't manage by myself when things were bad. So we have to think about that. I have David's picture there because one of the side effects when we think about it is something that he was undertreated for years, and I know as parents we worry about this with our kids. He refused all treatment for his RA until he and his wife had that precious baby that he's holding in the picture. I think we all worry about what happens with our kids when they need meds, but will they be able to have children with these medicines? The last thing, so that, like I said, I'm skipping a lot, that I want to get across is that Emily is on her 5th drug. She averages 3 to 4 years per drug. What happens when we run out? She's 26 years old. She's been on meds for 24 years. What happens when we run out of medicines? We need more choices. We need more drugs approved for kids. And having served as a patient rep, I appreciate everything the FDA is doing. I appreciate all of the listening you do to patients now and the involvement that FDA encourages from patients. But I would love to see more patients, caregivers on FDA advisory committees so that when you have 6 doctors talking, you might have at least 2 patients or caregivers instead of just one. So it's maybe a more rounded approach. And that's not, I hope that doesn't come across as a negative. It's a very heartfelt thought from me. But thank you for letting us be here. Thank you for listening to us. And I hope I didn't skip too much in my effort to keep it below my 7 minutes.
Hi, my name is Jacqueline Pena. My family and I live in Mason, Ohio. It's very close to Cincinnati. My son Jacob is 13 and he has polyarticular JIA. He was diagnosed at age 8, but I truly believe that he has had it his whole life. As I'm listening to everybody's story this morning, I could relate in so many ways. From the time he was born, we were in and out of hospitals, in and out of doctors, seeing a number of specialists, and we couldn't figure out what was going on. I knew something was wrong when he would wake up and not be able to move from the waist down. He started missing school because he was in so much pain. He was always sad, and we just didn't know why. He was seeing an immunologist at the time for a different syndrome. They were very high fevers, and it was called a FAPA syndrome, and I believe that it was actually really linked to his PJIA. When we got his diagnosis, it was a relief in some way because we had an answer. It wasn't the answer that we wanted, but it was an answer, and I felt like maybe now we could do something for him. I remember feeling this overwhelming guilt of, how did I miss it? How did I not know? But then I remember conversations that I had with family and friends, and they would tell me when I would mention that I thought my son had RA, that he was too young, that I was probably being a hypochondriac, that I was crazy to think it. I fought for many years to get this diagnosis, and since then, we have a multiple list of medical conditions that he currently has. Not only does he battle PJIA, but he has Crohn's, he has fibromyalgia, POTS, EDS, a heart murmur, heart arrhythmia, and he has a feeding tube. His Crohn's became so bad that his arthritis was flaring up all the time, and no matter what medication he was taking, it wasn't helping. We finally decided that we had no other choice but for him to get the feeding tube, and for about a year, that was his primary source of nutrition. That was in 2017. We just marked our year anniversary, but I have to tell you, it hasn't gotten any easier. The current beast that we fight every day is PJIA. He's on his 4th biologic. He receives IV infusion therapy treatments every 4 weeks, but he has a needle phobia. So those days are stressful, they're overwhelming, and you would think after 3 years they would get easier, but they don't. The worst part about it is that nothing is helping, and we are running out of options. We really need new treatments, new medications. Just at the age that he is, he's not old enough to try the adult drugs, so he can only do a certain number of biologics, and it's frustrating and overwhelming to think that I can't do more for my son. I want to talk about the challenges that our family has faced. We have moved 3 times to 3 different states. He was born in Florida, and we chose to move to Arizona for the dry heat, thinking it would help his arthritis symptoms. And while it did for some time, he still flared up. We realized that that was probably because he also had severe Crohn's at the time. Then we decided to move to Ohio so that he could become a patient at Cincinnati Children's Hospital to get hopefully better treatment, a new team of doctors, and unfortunately, we received the bad news recently that there's pretty much nothing more they can do. So it's frustrating, but I have hope. Every day I pray and I hope that something new is gonna come out on the market, that somehow, some way, something is gonna work for him. That's what keeps me going. I'm grateful for the new therapies that are out. I'm grateful that we've come so far with these biologics and all the treatments and medications that are currently being offered, but it's just not enough. He no longer goes to school. He has to be homeschooled. Our youngest is also paying the price of this disease. He does not participate in any extracurricular activities. He doesn't go to school anymore either because the risk of him bringing home a virus, a bacteria, or some kind of illness is way too overwhelming. I kind of feel like we live in this bubble at home. And the fear of going out and being exposed to something because he's so immunosuppressed is terrifying. My son is a warrior, and he battles this each and every minute of each and every day. He has more strength than I could ever imagine. My husband has had to work at night so that I could work during the day. And then in 2015, I left my career and decided that I had to primarily focus on Jacob and getting him better. I hope this isn't it. I hope that there's more to this. I hope that there's gonna be a silver lining somewhere. This roller coaster that we're on, that's full of twists and turns and stops, and it's gotta end. And I can't thank you enough for allowing me to speak, for hearing the stories that we all have to share. It's so important that we make our voices heard because our children need this. They need more. And I am not gonna give up. I consider myself a strong woman, but this disease makes me feel weak. I have to continue fighting for Jacob. I have to fight for my family, and I am not gonna let this battle win. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Kate Coons, and my daughter and I currently live in Roanoke, Virginia. My daughter Delaney is currently 15, and she'll be a high school sophomore later this month. Delaney was diagnosed at the age of 6 when we were living outside of Des Moines, Iowa. It took approximately 3 months for her diagnosis. That was quick. At that time, in Iowa, we had 2 pediatric rheumatologists. She presented with arthritis, so it was just in her hips. So we were pretty fortunate at that time. It was September 2009. She woke up, couldn't move, get out of bed. By December, we had a diagnosis, treatment plan, and we were rocking pretty well. Come August, that changed to extended oligo, and we started adding more medicines to our plan. And we were on methotrexate from December of 2009 till now. We have been on 3 different biologics, and one was phenomenal. I loved it. Delaney loved it. And then recently, we would still be on it, that form of it. We've done infusions, we've done shots. Delaney did not like shots. She likes shots now. Because of oligo, it is not the indication for biologics. Not sure how many oligo parents know that. I didn't know that until real recently, when we were trying to get her biologic that she's on switched from the infusion to the auto injector, because Delaney's veins have been on infusions. Her last infusion round was 5 years, every month. Labs every 4 weeks, or maybe if she was lucky, we could go every other month. So she was blown veins every time, to the point she has a rule. You can do one arm one time, one arm the next. After that, transport, life flight has to come down and put in. We don't do hands. We don't go anywhere else. So we were blown veins too much. So it was time to find a different method for the infusion that was working. It was going to be easy, we thought. I mean, I've had the same insurance. I switched jobs. We relocated from Iowa to Virginia for her. JA, warmer climate. I'm a single parent. I was military when I had Delaney, had wonderful insurance. Once you are in the military, you might have complaints about TRICARE, but I will never complain about TRICARE. I love it, loved it, wish I still had it. It's great. Commercial insurance, love or hate it, but you always be careful what you wish you didn't have until you don't have it anymore. But with her biologic process of trying to keep her on the one she had, or currently has, but just to change the form of the way she went from the infusions to get the auto injectors, denied automatically from the insurance company. She doesn't have poly-JIA. Okay, well, she's been on it for the last 5 years. Well, it's not FDA approved for oligo. Okay, well, she's been on it for the last 5 years. You've continued to approve her for the last 5 years. FDA says it's not approved for her. So that's my ask. The indications and the usage needs to be broader. It's the same medicine used to treat the different subtypes. Extended oligo for so many kids are being used for she's been, and so many of our kids have been used the same biologics. Mine especially, 7 or 8 out of the last 9 years. And then all of a sudden had to have this shock. I was told I could pay the cash price, more than my salary. So, but fortunate, using the biologic company, the third appeal through their assistance program, we were able to get the ClickJet program. But it was amazing to realize that just because of a simple sentence, and going back and looking at the other 2 biologics she had already been on, has the same usage and indication. So that's my ask, is just to, when those are getting approved, making sure that the kids with oligo also is being looked at. And I know that the clinical trials and everything just broaden the clinical trials, because that's so important, because there's only so many medicines that can work for our kids. So I thank everyone for coming and listening to our stories. Delaney's had to give up a lot. She's done an online school in middle school because of stuff was not just working. She had some side effects from some other medicines that she was on through her treatment plans. And so she gave up some Irish dance. She was an Irish dancer for years. So, but yeah, that's us. We moved, relocated. But now she loves the auto injector. It's 15 seconds. It tickles. She laughs the first time. I was like, you're laughing? You're not screaming? It's 15 seconds of fun, she calls it. So it's the best. I'm like, okay. It took 3 months to get it approved, but okay. So that's all I will say to that. So I appreciate everyone's time and effort, but if the indications and usage could be widened so more kids can have the ability to be covered, that would be much appreciative. Thank you.
Great. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Melanie. Again, I spoke for a few minutes earlier. I live near Columbus, Ohio, but I'm a Connecticut native, so I'm not a Midwesterner. I'm more of a New Englander. My current job, I actually am lucky enough to be engaged on numerous pediatric rheumatology projects. I work with PR Coyne, Partners, Cara, and have a few Cory projects as well. So I like to tell people that I jumped in head first, not foot first, not a toe. I jumped all the way in, and so this has become my life, and I couldn't be more happy. It's not exactly the path I had created for myself, but it has been a phenomenal silver lining to my daughter's diagnosis. I touched on this a little bit earlier, but my daughter was diagnosed at 20 months old with polyarticular juvenile idiopathic arthritis. She was not walking at 20 months old. We had, had her normal pediatric checkups at 12 months, 15 months, and every time the doctor and I kind of discussed the fact that she wasn't walking yet, but she had an older sister and two parents who liked to cart her around. So, it kind of helped to explain that a little bit. At 18 months, we finally succumbed to the PT thing. She did not do well in PT. We couldn't figure out what was wrong. I believe that she had active disease starting around 11 months when she had a febrile seizure that launched her immune system into attack mode. When she was diagnosed, she had over 10 joints affected. We would notice that when we wiped her hands after dinner, she would, cry or pull away. We noticed that she stopped crawling. She would just walk upright on her knees. She had zero range of motion in one wrist and only 30% in the other, so that explains the crawling thing. Our diagnosis was fairly quick. Luckily, our pediatrician's MA has a family history of rheumatoid arthritis and brought it to our attention. We had a referral that afternoon and a diagnosis within a few weeks. I still didn't buy it, though. I wondered if there was something else going on, arthritis, kids don't get that. I was only about 90% on whether or not I thought that this was what was going on until one morning, about 5 days after our diagnosis, we had another joint swell up to the size of a softball, and that was my breaking point. That is when I absolutely locked myself in my closet and had a complete breakdown. I officially bought it at that point. We got her under control fairly quickly. And what I would like to talk about today is kind of, despite the control we have over her disease, what we still kind of deal with as far as the treatment goes. We started with, NSAIDs, DMARDs, joint injections, all at the same time. I am the type of parent who wants to eradicate this immediately, and so I was not the conservative parent terrified of the medication. I said, please give me everything you have, and I want it all right now. And I had a doctor who was willing to help me with that. The only problem was Megan was only 20 months old, and so none of this was approved. We paid out of pocket for our DMARD. And then we failed that DMARD, or as I like to say, the DMARD failed her. Within 11 weeks, we had 3 new joints affected on the DMARD. So we finally were approved for biologic number 1. Biologic number 1 worked like a magic wand. It was absolutely amazing. She got sick all the time. We couldn't really take her very many places, but she wasn't in school yet, so we could deal with that. But she could run and she could play and she could jump. And she was sleeping through the night. That was when I knew that things were really working. Unfortunately, that paradise only lasted for about 2 months, and she flared again. At that point, we were ready to try biologic number 2. We asked for it, and we had a huge struggle with insurance. They declined the biologic we had asked for, suggested another biologic, and then they took 4 months to approve their own suggestion. During that time, my daughter was maintained on a DMARD and an NSAID until her labs came back a month later, horrible, and so we had to decrease those. So my poly-GIA kid, with at this point about 14 joints affected, was functioning on Tylenol. That did not go well. We started Biologic C, which was our magic wand, in August of 2013, and it put all of her large joints into remission. I carried her into the hospital the day of her first infusion, and she was running by the weekend. It was absolutely amazing. This treatment doesn't come with, doesn't come without a burden. It is an infusion. We do have to take a half day off from school. She does have to have an IV placed My daughter and I are both numb resistant, so for her, a numbing cream that would normally take about 20 minutes takes over an hour to actually work. We know that now, and that's great, but it was a struggle that we had. We have been able to drop some of our medications and maintain her fairly well. Although we recently, in March of this year, found some active arthritis in her TMJ. We added a DMARD, and it did this to her. So we have these oral ulcers that will not go away. We stop the DMARD, they resolve, we start the DMARD up again, even at a half dose, and they start up again. So we deal with more side effects of medication than what we do burden of disease. The other issue with these medications that are keeping her arthritis quiet is that we have immune suppression issues. We have challenges that you don't normally think about. So if my daughter were to get strep throat, do we skip the biologic? Do we push the biologic? Do we skip the DMARD? Do we push the DMARD out a day? Those are things that, you don't necessarily think about. Since her arthritis is quiet, the risk of her to flare, she doesn't remember what a flare was like. She was so young at the time that she doesn't remember what a flare was like, and I don't ever want her to experience that again if we can avoid it. So we have to weigh the pros and cons of that. We've found that we stick with the biologic and we make that happen, but we do kind of push the DMARD a little bit, and we've found that works for us. But it's just something that you don't necessarily think about. Something that I would like you to take home with you today, an ideal medication for us would be something that doesn't hurt and doesn't require a Band-Aid. Something that isn't an infusion or an injection, a medication that doesn't cause painful oral ulcers or daily tummy aches, a medication that doesn't scare families fearing the future of health insurance and health care due to the high price tag. What I want to make sure I get across today is that my daughter has been extremely lucky in her journey. I know it sounds like we've been through a lot, but our primary medication is working. She tolerates it fairly well. We can afford it. Unfortunately, sometimes active disease is hiding and doing permanent damage to joints like the jaw. The treatment that was working now needs to be modified, and we have to deal with the side effects of those modifications. We go back up the hill on the roller coaster again, ready to free fall. Many families I work with in my JIA activities are out of treatment options at the age of 8, 10, sometimes even as young as 6, out of treatment options, often due to the age. Sometimes the FDA has only approved medications for patients over a certain age, or only in adults and not in kids. I can only imagine the conversation that happens between that parent and that child. I think it might be something like this. I'm so sorry, honey, but there are no other treatments for us to try. We'll try to manage your pain as best as we can until something else is available. We'll probably have to do surgery in the future to fix the permanent damage that may be done, but we will wait and we will try what comes next. I'm hopeful, based on our gathering today, that the time and energy put into this day and the impactful listening that's happening in this room and sharing our stories can be very helpful and help kids in the future. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you so much to our panel. I think we heard so many important takeaways about treatment, that it's certainly not as simple as finding a good treatment and accessing that treatment. There's all sorts of challenges and barriers. Sometimes that's because there's multiple diseases happening and you're playing whack-a-mole to try to figure out what you're going to try to work on today. There's these administrative issues, not just with insurance, but is it approved for you? Does it have an indication that you need? There's a guessing game. And then I think one of the big things we heard about was burden of the treatment itself, how it's administered, what the side effects look like. And then certainly that folks are either out of options or running out of options, and that's pretty scary, especially for really young kids. You have a whole life ahead of you and want to figure out what's next. So I'm interested to hear now from those of you in the room and the folks joining us online. We've got two questions we've got about 30 minutes, and we've got two questions to talk through. This first one is going to be really about what does your current treatment regimen look like? Does it work for you? How well does it work? And then we're going to get into downsides of treatment, side effects, et cetera. I do want to remind the folks online, you were in the poll tab before for the polling questions. Now you need to be in the question tab, but that's a misnomer. You can use it even if you don't have a question. It can be for a comment, so don't be fooled. You can just make comments. And we expanded the character limit, so I think it's now a 300 character limit, and if you need more than that, just send us multi-part comments, and our folks who are monitoring the intake can piece your parts together. So thanks for working with us online. So we've got our mic stands. I think we might have someone ready to make a comment.
Hi, my name is Carol. My son Ian is 18. He was diagnosed at age 15 after 3 months of not having any telltale symptoms of his SJIA. He had no rash, he had no swollen joints. In the 4 years he's had this, he's only had one swollen joint this whole time. After he was diagnosed, he started on the Actemra, and that worked really well with the infusions. After about a year and a half, we tried to wean him off to see if he was in remission, and within a week past his regularly scheduled date, the flare-up happened, and it was worse than it was during that whole entire 3 months of no treatment. He got back on the infusions, did really well. This past January, he got switched to subcutaneous injections. He goes to college this month now, 3 weeks away. And he's done really well with the sub-Q injections. It's twice a month instead of the once a month. He did have a flare-up at the beginning of June. He messed up on one of the injections, and he might have lost a couple of the little drops of medicine, and it was a day late, and there was a couple other factors in there. He had to go to the hospital because he had a fever, which is part of the systemic JIA. They wanted to do blood cultures. We made the mistake of not going to Children's Hospital, and the hospital that we went to didn't put all the puzzle pieces of the SJIA together with the fever. They wanted to do blood cultures and things like that, and that was just a big nightmare. One of the things with the current treatment that we don't know if it is just happening because it was ready to happen is that he has always been a runner. He's been a cross-country runner. After he got on his treatment, he's participated in cross-country for the last 3 years. He ran in the fall, but starting in January, whenever he did cardio, whenever he would go out for a run, he would just feel a tremendous pressure on his lungs. And he would not be running, so he wasn't running so much. We went to see the rheumatologist, told her about it, and she said, go to a pulmonologist to check to see if it was related to either asthma or an SJI-related lung disease, which I really had no idea about those until she mentioned that, and that was a whole nother scary part of the picture and everything. So the pulmonologist has cleared him. He's had CAT scans, he's had x-rays, he's clear on that, but then the pulmonologist says, let's see what the cardiologist says, because something's happening here. The cardiologist has cleared him. Now they're like, well, we're going to bring the breathing portion to the pulmonologist, but it's just not knowing. We may not have an answer. We don't know if it is just a coincidence that it coincided with the subcutaneous injections, or if it's just something, a different progression of his disease. It's very comforting knowing that his heart doesn't have any abnormalities. So that's just one of the things that we don't know that is going on with his treatment. And him leaving for college is a very happy time, but it's also just not knowing that whenever he gets a fever, is this the new normal? Is he going to have to go inpatient to have all these blood tests done, which our doctors have said, no, just try to get him down to us so we can check him out and everything. But I totally understand one of the panelists saying, if you get the fever, do we do the biologic? He's not supposed to do it because it's going to suppress his immune system. Just all those things that go into the planning. And also, he just had a meningitis B vaccination which his pediatrician has never done for anybody before, but because it's new and it's recommended for immunosuppressed patients, and everything seems fine with that. So just thank you for listening. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Looks like we have someone coming to the mic. No rush.
Again, I'm a systemic parent, and our son is 13, and everything that she just said, we are experiencing that same fear of what is happening, and we're seeing pulmonology frequently. He is still unable to be very active, which is, I mean, seriously, let's talk about our own mental health, where we are trying to accept that this isn't going away is really, really hard, because we just still have never made it back to that base level of normal activity, unless it was like maybe the first few weeks after biologic number 3, which has been about a year and a half for us, that he's been on that, and that's the best we have been able to do. But we still have the wheelchair, the walker, a boot, a wrist brace, that we need frequently, and we have an amazing school district that will allow him to lay down at school and hydrate, and they're really great at communicating with me. But just the treatment regimen, I mean, we always wish for better. And our child is 13 and he's 200 pounds. We call him Big E, or the Big E that could. And so we're very curious as to what if we were able to double this therapy, but that's not approved. And I don't know how many 200-pound pediatric patients there are out there. I mean, and he's a big boy. So that's always, we don't know what the outcome would be, but it's not approved, so far it hasn't been an option for us, but that's just, this is the best we've done, what if we added more? And so we've had to add, be creative, as our rheumatologist calls it, but we also really, really fear what is happening in the lungs. Is something happening in the heart? So that's how it's going for us as well.
Great.
Thank you
so much.
I'm an ERA patient, and there isn't really good treatment for ERA. And then you add jaw on top of that, and there's no good treatment for that either. I've had one surgery. I'm basically doomed to have my joints replaced in, 10, 20 years. So, with the rest of my arthritis, there's just not a good way to control it. I've run through the gambit. I'm on my last biologic. My only hope after that is some kind of DMARD, or maybe a psoriatic drug. So, yeah, my current treatment regimen does not help much.
Thank you for sharing. I think that's definitely part of our mission here today, is we don't want to be out of options, so thank you for sharing that. Mm-hmm.
My name is Maria. I am from New Jersey, and my parents started taking me to the doctors when I was around 4 years old, when they noticed something was wrong. Fast forward 4 years later, doctors, imaging, you name it, I had it done. And finally, by the age of 8, I was officially diagnosed with RF-negative polyarticular juvenile rheumatoid arthritis. And I am now 35 years old. I reached a point towards the end of 2017 where I have exhausted all of my options, biologic, DMARDs, you name it, I've been on it. So I sat with my rheumatologist and we discussed what we can do moving forward, and the first option was going back on an infusion that worked for me, but because I was at the highest dose, I would get frequent upper respiratory infections, so my rheumatologist at that time decided to stop it. Knowing that with that particular infusion, I had very severe reactions and I had to heavily pre-medicate, we moved forward, and 7 hours into my infusion, I started to have a reaction. I had very hard trouble breathing. My throat felt like it was closing, so they stopped it. And the doctor told my father, who came to pick me up, that I cannot be alone for 24 hours. So the rest of 2017, we took a break. I wasn't on anything, and it was rough. And then finally sat with my rheumatologist again, and we decided to go back on another infusion where I had 4 treatments of, and all 4 times my throat closed again. But because it was, we just had to try it again, and it was a very, very hard decision to make, because do I want to put myself through that again at this point in my life? Because it's physically taxing, it's emotionally taxing, and it was an extremely hard decision that I had to make. So I decided to go through it in March, and my first treatment was 8 hours at the infusion center. Within the first 2-3 hours, again, I had trouble breathing. I was heavily premedicated again. We had to stop it, administer more Benadryl, start it again. Finally, I got through it after 8 hours, went home again, couldn't be left alone for 24 hours. 2 weeks later, went through it all again. I was only there for maybe 7 hours. Came home again, couldn't really be left alone for 24 hours. And so, but I'm at this point in my disease where, yes, is my current treatment helping me? I may be functioning on a good day at 40%. And just to be the age that I am at 35 and not to feel so helpless, and not to have nothing left, you can't imagine what it's like. And sorry.
I think so many of us feel what you're going through, and we really thank you for being brave enough to share, because it really is our call to action. That's not acceptable. So I think collectively we can move forward and have more options so that you're not making those trade-offs. So thank you so much for sharing your story. Thank you.
I'm standing, so I will go and echo some of the same sort of feelings. I'm Jen. I have had JIA since I was 11 months old. I've had it for 33 years now, and do the math. So I have run into a different issue where I'm out of options because unrelated to my arthritis, they found a benign tumor many years ago. And I know we're going to have a clinical trial conversation later, but because people are excluded from those trials, they didn't know how biologics would then behave with tumors. Therefore, once they found it and once it started doing some funny things, they just didn't feel comfortable having me on those medications anymore. So therefore, I'm really left with different subtypes of medications and DMARDs, which of course have their own issues, and I am afraid of failing those. And there have been times in my life that it looked like I was going in that direction, and then I thought, are we just going back to Tylenol, like we're hearing that you were maintained for a month without any other options. So I think coming up with things, and as we continue to develop new drugs, thinking about how we can be looking at more real-world evidence to make sure that people like myself aren't excluded from those opportunities from newer drugs that are developed.
Great foreshadowing for the clinical trial panel. Thank you for sharing. Okay.
Hi, my name's Cory. My wife talked a couple of times about our son. Mine comes from I'm looking more at like the cost of treatments. We live in central Minnesota, and my son has high functioning autism, so any insurance, he's already high risk. So we're limited on our options of insurance. So we have him on MA. So my wife can't work because she has to be at home with him. I can't really get a better job because if I make more money, he's off of MA. His treatments are almost $1 million a year. And if we get different insurance or we pay for it, I have to get a job that makes 2 to 3 times more than what I make now, because it's $30,000, $40,000 a year out of pocket that we have to pay in order to have them covered for insurance. So I don't know anybody in this room that can afford $1 million a year to pay for treatments. So, thanks.
Thank you so much. Definitely a hard issue. Let me pause for a minute and see if we have anything coming in from the web folks, and then we'll take our 2 questions in the room, and then we'll go to our next question. Vincent or Laura?
Sure, Suze, thank you. We're getting, again, a lot of validation for what's being said in the room and lots of comments coming in, pointing out a few things that, some folks are very thankful that their treatments have been life-changing. Then some folks are saying the treatments did a great job on a majority of the things, but there are still, small amounts of inflammation that they're having a hard time controlling, all the way to taking multiple medications and still not seeing any relief from pain. The other thing that was pointed out is a parent wanted to point out is consideration for the development stage, when to give medications, because missed milestones has like that butterfly effect, and it's a long period of time, to a child's life.
Okay, thank you so much. So we'll take our last 2 in-room comments. I don't know, who was first? Go ahead.
So my daughter is on her 3rd biologic. The first one was a daily injection, which was effective initially, but terrible to administer. She was 3. She didn't understand why she had to have shots every day. Eventually, she just assumed that everyone did that. And when she learned that wasn't the case, well, didn't go over well. The second one was a monthly injection, and we were hoping that was going to be the one. Least invasive, least frequent, but we may as well have just given her sugar water. It did nothing. So we moved on. Unfortunately, the course of treatment required that we tried so many times of virtually no benefit from that treatment before we could move on to the biweekly infusion that she's on now. And she's now 4. Her veins are terrible. Her mother and I have given her terrible veins. So we opted to and pushed for a port placement for her. So at this point, we've modified our daughter for easier administration of medication that is working 7 out of the 14 days between dosages at best. So 50% of her childhood is spent dealing with this medication that's not working well. And at this point, due to FDA approval on some of the other options, this is our last choice. So we're just kind of treading water. It's worked the best out of the bunch, but we're not satisfied with good enough. I feel that there is sometimes a disconnect with the medical community of what they view as a success versus what we as parents view as a success. And I think if I took a quick show of hands, a lot of you would probably agree with me. Is that true? So that's something that I wanted to draw attention to as well. It's very easy in the scope of an appointment or a phone call or viewing from the outside to be like, oh, well, they're doing better. But good enough is not good enough for those of us who have to deal with this day in and day out. And a lot of the panelists have made that point today as well.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. And I think that issue around how we define success is also going to play into the discussion we have on clinical trials. We need to be at the table helping define what success looks like for treatment and for clinical trials. So, and then our last, can I do the in-person comment,
Yeah.
and then we'll come to the back? So please go ahead.
Okay. So we have been very successful with treatment. My daughter has been on a DMARD and a biologic. But with uveitis and with any, JIA illness, at some point they want to take off medication after being in remission for a certain amount of time. And as a parent, I'm the conservative one and my husband's the yes, let's take her off medicine one. And it's very, very scary. We've gone off Remicade biologic twice now. The first time she was on it for a year. The second time she was on it for 2 years, and that's after I begged our rheumatologist saying, hey, I went to JA conference and the uveitis specialist said this. We don't have a uveitis specialist in our area. We live in St. Louis. And he allowed it, but basically said there's not enough evidence that it works 1 year versus 2 years versus lifelong. And again, it goes back to that research. But it's very frustrating as a parent that there's no good treatment regimen for our diseases. Because my daughter has poly-JIA and has uveitis, both are treated as the same illness but different illnesses, if that makes any sense. So her JIA is very stable and has been, although she always does better on Remicade physically than when she's off of it. But, you know, she's in remission. But when she goes off of it, I am scared to death every single time. And my doctor was very honest with me, and he said, you know, that black box warning, we were told we can't keep kids on it any longer. For, you know, once they hit that medicated remission, you know, got to take it off. And it's very, very scary as a parent. I just feel like there needs to be more research in how long these treatments can, you know, our kids can be on the medicine. If it is effective, why do we need to stop the medications? Is it insurance driven, money driven? You know, those are a lot of the concerns I had. The treatment is great, but why do we have to stop it? Does that make any sense?
Absolutely, and I think it's a perfect research question to be asking, so thank you for sharing that. I know I was getting a wave from the back that there was another comment. But,
Sure,
okay.
Suze, thank you. Very similar to our last in-person comment, is just that concern for the reaction to the medication and trying to figure out, do I take that chance, do I gamble with the condition or the medication?
Right. Yes, okay, thank you so much. And I think, yeah, that definitely resonates with what other folks have said. So we've got just under 10 minutes for our second question, and I know we're going to have a lot of thoughts on this one. We've already heard about balancing, you know, when are the side effects worse than the disease and vice versa. So it looks like we can start right here with the most significant downsides of the treatments you've tried.
Hi, I'm Angie again from the first panel. I actually have two things I'd like to mention. The first one is allergic reactions. One of our daughters, Laura, has a condition called mast cell activation syndrome, which basically means her body is ready to react at anything, anytime, whether or not it was okay yesterday or last hour. She had a pretty significant reaction to one of the biologics, hives. We were very, very scared about that one. Ended up having to go off of that. So that's definitely a concern that our family has, and I think probably we're not alone with that. Also, just like one of the dads over here mentioned, our girls have terrible veins. Really bad, unfortunately. I have bad veins. My mom has bad veins. They had it coming. My husband has garden hoses instead of veins, so it would have been nice if they had gotten that from him, but that didn't happen. So, you know, a lot of these treatments are really difficult for us, infusions, because it's hard to find a vein. You know, you go in and you have stick after stick after stick, and what kid wants to keep doing that? What adult wants to keep doing that? Laura has a port. When she was 17, we convinced her pediatric rheumatologist that we needed that, and it has been a godsend. Has not been without its problems, but it's working for her. Erin, we're currently in the process of switching off of an infusion because the nurses just are not finding veins. Our current rheumatologist is not willing to go down that road with us for a port. So we are now looking at a complete med switch because she cannot tolerate the infusions anymore. So that, you know, that's been one of the hugest issues that we have faced with treatment.
Thank you.
So something that people have already touched on today, but I'd like to emphasize even more, is the jaw. We do not have research on how these medications affect the jaw. And it's scary going on to a med, and it's like, I don't know if this is actually going to help where it counts. Like Mom said, I am now switching to an injectable drug, and I emailed my doctor about it because it was like, well, this thing I'm on right now is kind of starting to not help as much, so let's try something else. And I said, how about this? How about that? And she goes, great, there's no TMJ research on either of them. And I went, oh crap. Well, so I'm going blind into this. And as Mom also shared, I just had jaw surgery about a month ago, just over a month ago, and at one of my pre-op appointments, my surgeon looked at me and said, your joints are messed up. Another oh crap moment. I have to have braces for my surgery, and the way we monitor the jaws through MRIs, I can't have those right now because of my braces. So, we can't really be monitoring it. So to be going on a new drug that we have no idea if it's going to help the jaw, and not even knowing the status of my jaw right now, other than the fact that it's messed up, is absolutely terrifying. Something else I just wanted to touch on, it's really been hard with treatments. Arthritis is an invisible disease a lot of the time. You can't tell that a person has arthritis all the time just by looking at them. And injections, doing those has made me feel even more invisible. No one sees my treatment. No one sees how scared I am to poke myself in the stomach, even though it's an insanely short needle. And it makes me feel vulnerable and invulnerable at the same time, and it's absolutely terrifying. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We'll go to this side now.
Hi, Stacy again. As we went through our courses of treatment, one of the first things that they did was the injection straight into my daughter's knee. Within 5 weeks, that knee was probably 4 times the size of what it's supposed to look like. And we were on our way back, the 2-hour drive to her rheumatologist, where we started methotrexate and confirmed her other knee was now involved. So we were at 2 joints. Within month and a half, they said, see you in 3 months, month and a half, we were back with total of 4 joints, and determining whether methotrexate had failed her. Through the course of the evaluation, they did determine, through conversations with her, again, we're talking about a 3-year-old who really cannot communicate everywhere that it's hurting. We had to go to OT to teach her how to communicate that this is hurting. I truly feel, I think somebody else said that they should have been diagnosed sooner. We just recently were watching old videos of her when she was little, learning how to crawl and walk, and I can see it. It's there in the videos. So we went on our first biologic, did amazing for her joints. The swelling all went away. She was running, she was jumping, she was doing great, and then the eye got involved. And because the eye got involved and that biologic doesn't treat the eye, we had to then switch to her second biologic, but we couldn't switch to her second biologic because she didn't have enough joints that were involved. So we had to stay the course and try and deal with the eye because insurance would not approve the second biologic just for treatment of the eye. She had to have the right number of joints involved in order to go on that biologic. I don't know if it's a blessing or a curse. She did get enough joints involved that we were able to switch to that biologic. That biologic was hell when we first started it. We would be on it for 2 weeks. She would get ridiculously sick. We'd have to come off of all of her meds to let her immune system come up to fight whatever it was. We'd go back on it. We did this about 2 months. And every time we came off, the eye got flared again. And the doctor, her rheumatologist said, this is our last chance. We've got it. She has not been on this long enough to even tell if it's helping her because she keeps getting sick. At that point, infusions felt like a threat that we were trying to avoid going to infusions. We managed to get to spring in Iowa where it's extremely cold. And she finally settled in with that biologic, and we did start to see, okay, everything's kind of calming down, the eye is under control again. made it through the summer, and then October hit. And as a little girl going into preschool, from October to February, not this past winter, but would have been 2016 going in 2017, she missed at least a month and a half of school because she would get the respiratory issues. And we'd go off all meds. We had to see pulmonology and every single doctor to get everybody to sign off after 2 weeks of being off meds. And then we'd start the meds back up again, gradually, starting with methotrexate first. Within 2 days of getting that medication, she was worse than what she was before we took her off of it right before that. And during this whole time, the eye is flaring again, to the point where she had adhesions, and we had to keep her eye dilated in order to break the adhesions loose in order to get that eye to heal. And when you reach that point and your child's in preschool and you get a phone call from the preschool when you've talked to the director and they tell you, we are calling an ambulance because your daughter's eye will not react to our tests. We think she's fallen and hit her head. And you're in a panic saying, please do not call the ambulance. We are doing this to the child, to fix her eye. There's nothing that I know of other than eye drops and steroid eye drops and dilating the eye that is targeted for the uveitis. And it's scary. We did finally, through the course of everything last year, her tonsils and adenoids were swollen. Coming into spring, school year this year, took the tonsils and adenoids out, and we actually made it all through last winter without anything major. But she too has had the strep throat to the scarlet fever and the rash, different rashes. And for all of last year, we had a mystery rash that would literally, I had to take pictures of this rash because by the time we would get to the doctor, the rash would be gone. And they did not believe me. And I'm like, no, seriously, it was here when we came in the waiting room. So I guess that's kind of our experience of the downsides of treatments, because they could never actually see the rash. They couldn't actually see this or that other than pictures. How do you treat that? How do you know if that's a side effect of medication or just part of the arthritis and then the uveitis not having, anything that, we had to get up to that joint count in order to get on something that would help with that. So, thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. Lots of complicated issues. So you two are going to be our final in the room comments, and we're just about ready to start our third topic of the day. So we'll hear from you two first. Mm-hmm.
I'll keep it brief again. I seem to be at the end a lot. Downsides, I'm thinking more not just side effects, at least from my perspective. I kind of want to talk about what Katie mentioned when she did her talk earlier. To me, one of the downsides, in addition to the many side effects that there can be, is the inconsistency in the approval process and even in the instructions on usage. So I happen to have a child who's got multiple diagnoses. Some of the main treatments treat both conditions. However, the drug levels, the prescribing levels, the frequency is not consistent. So we constantly run into things where we're told, well, you're at this level of medication, so you don't need to have it more frequently. Meanwhile, rheumatology is going, our dosage is monthly, regardless, we don't look at the drug levels. So we struggle constantly with that battle between different specialists. What's acceptable, what's not acceptable, and how can we get my child treated? And then the bigger picture is when I feel like when it's treating multiple conditions, it's a constant wave. So, oh, great, his joints are great right now, but there goes his GI. Oh, great, that's better now, the joints are bad. So I feel like, I don't know if it's because it's trying to do the job of two, or that we just haven't hit that perfect storm of medications and frequency. That's the problem. So that's one thing I wanted to point out. The second thing I would like to point out that we struggle with is what's a side effect and what's disease progression. So right now, I'm sorry, Ben, I'm calling you out. My son is getting crazy rashes. We can't figure out why. GI thinks it's psoriasis. dermatology is saying maybe not, and everybody just keeps scratching their head. Psoriasis could be disease progression based on the diagnosis that he has, or it could be from the biologic that he happens to be on. No one seems to know the answer. So this is another thing, like I wish we had some kind of guide. I feel like sometimes I stand here and go, who do I call? Do I call my GI? Do I call my rheumatologist? Do I call the pediatrician? Is it a virus? I don't know what this is. I need some kind of guidance on how to do that. And I think the drugs could help with that direction as well, like better guidance. All they do is say call. Call who?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Nicole. My daughter was diagnosed poly-JIA at 11 months old after about 4 months of what the heck is going on. Just to kind of preface that though, she had not hit any of her milestones on time. She is adopted. She was drug exposed prenatally, so we thought that was the cause. But by the time she was 10 and a half months old, she wasn't crawling, had just started sitting up on her own. We knew it was really something more. Diagnosis happened after a week in the hospital where they tested her for everything from a virus to HIV and other things because they did not know what she could have come with from her biological mother. Her knee was stuck at a 30-degree angle, so they had to do a straightening cast on my 11-month-old for over a month. And when it came off, she crawled for the first time, and I cried because I had not seen her do anything prior to that. And it took until she was about 16, 17 months old for her to walk. They tried a DMARD, and that went okay for about 9 months, and then she developed an allergy to it, and we had to stop. They tried another DMARD, which did nothing. She got worse. And so they took her off of that and put her on her first biologic, which we thought was our miracle drug. Her joints got better. She was doing really well for about a year or so. And we went to the eye doctor for a regular checkup, and he's like, oh, you have nothing to worry about. She's on this drug, and she hasn't had anything in 2 years, so we're good. Then he looked in her eyes, and she had uveitis, both eyes. So that started that roller coaster. She was 3. And then at 4, just before her 4th birthday, she couldn't really walk very well. She was limping constantly. Took her to the rheumatologist. Oh, I don't see any active signs of disease. You know, I don't know what's going on. Just, we'll keep watching her, keep her on the drug. She's got no signs. This went on for months. And finally I said, you know, can we do some x-rays or something? So they did x-rays and they said, oh, we see erosion in her ankle. She was in Irish dance, gymnastics, regular 4-year-old, excuse me. And so I said, you know, can you send us to an orthopedic doctor? I just want to make sure she's not doing any more damage. So we did that, and I was totally prepared for it's erosion. She might need a brace, maybe injections in her ankle, I don't know. And I felt like I was punched in the stomach when the orthopedist said, this is not JIA, this is a vascular necrosis, bone death. One of the bones in her ankle had died and collapsed. She was at this point hardly able to walk at all. And he told me that the only thing that could have caused this was steroid use. So we have suddenly this side effect of the steroids that she had been given during her biologic infusions that she was getting every month that we thought were working great. And MRI showed that they weren't. She was so inflamed, her bone marrow was inflamed in this leg. And we were all of a sudden not able to continue with this biologic, and we had to switch to something else, and she can no longer have steroids of any kind for the rest of her life because it might cause it again. She was wheelchair bound for the last year, completely non-weight bearing for her entire kindergarten year. And the infusion we are on now is not rated to treat uveitis, but we're using it as if it is. It's keeping her joints in pretty good condition, but we have not gone more than 7 weeks without a flare of her uveitis in 3 years. She just turned 6 last week. She is now out of the wheelchair, which we weren't told probably wouldn't happen. When she was first diagnosed, we were told that her ankle would have to be fused when she stopped growing between the ages of 17 and 21. And I searched for an orthopedist who knew what to do with this, and it was really hard to find one because it's incredibly rare. She's the one kid a year that this happens to that isn't a cancer patient. Steroids for us are completely out, and we're running out of options for drugs for her JIA, and we are out of options for her uveitis. So I don't really know where we go from here, and it's terrifying for me every day because I also have 3 other children and I'm single. So side effects for us are it really messes with family life, as well as, is she going to be able to walk by the time she's an adult, even with all of these treatments that we have? So that's where we are.
Thank you so much for sharing. And I'm sorry, I feel like we could go on for several hours just on this topic, so I hate to move forward. But I think so much of what we heard leads us right into our next topic, which is how do we get more information about the drugs that we do have? How do we get more treatments and more therapies? So we're going to do a crew change. The panel is going to leave the stage, and our third panel is going to come up and take their seats.
Hello. I'm going to try to be really quick because we are lagging a little bit behind. So far, we've had a pretty amazing day listening and learning about what it's like to live with and deal with the treatments of JIA. And I can say, as a provider, this is pretty enlightening. As we take care of y'all, see you in episodes, right? But we don't really go through so much all of the day-to-day stuff. And so this has been eye-opening to me, as well as I'm sure other providers in the room. But we're going to shift gears now, as Suze said, to talk about another part of clinical trial development, and that is the clinical trials themselves. We've been doing trials in pediatric rheumatology for well over 20 years now. And, you know, when I started off as a pediatric rheumatologist, we really had very little in the way of drugs. We had only NSAIDs. And as I was a fellow and in my training, methotrexate came in. So from that perspective, things have exploded, and it's super. Right now, we actually have drugs that work for many patients. They are not perfect, and many patients, there are still patients that don't respond, but we have made a great deal of progress. And now we're sort of into a second phase of doing trials in pediatric rheumatology, and that is doing trials in an environment where we do have drugs. Because the first phase was, in fact, doing studies when we didn't have other things to offer patients. And that puts a whole new complexity and extra issues on about exactly how to do the studies. So I think this is a good time for us to be having something like this group today together, because it's a time to reassess how we do clinical trials, and it's a time to think about getting patients more engaged in the clinical trials and their development from the very beginning. And we're all here today because that's something that I think we all share an interest in moving forward. So we're going to hear now from patients who have and their parents who have participated in some trials, and get some insights from them about it. Now, as Suze said, how do I change to the next slide? This thing? Okay. Oh, we already did that. I forgot. Okay. So we're just going to really, really quickly go through a few terms. They are on your glossary, so that's sort of a cheat sheet. As we're moving through, you may have something to add. But a clinical trial, let's just start with that. A clinical trial is a study that's designed to test an intervention. And the intervention can be a drug. Today, we're only talking about drug clinical trials, but it actually can be any kind of intervention. It could be a psychological intervention. It could be a dietary intervention. Whenever we think about clinical trials, we think about placebo, right? And placebo is a compound that looks like and tastes like the study drug, the drug of interest, but actually has no biologic activity. The next one is randomization, and that's how a participant in a study is put into one treatment or another by chance, okay? And that could be a placebo, or it could be a study drug or a comparator drug. Next is the blinding, double blinding. So if a trial is blinded, it means that the participant doesn't know what drug they've gotten or whether they've gotten placebo or what. Double blind means that in addition to the patient not knowing, the provider also doesn't know. So nobody in the local study team knows whether you're getting drug or not. An open label trial is a trial where everybody knows what drug you're on, okay? You know, and the people taking care of you also know. A withdrawal trial is a study where everybody gets study drug to begin with, and then the responders, so people who have had benefit from the drug, are then randomized to either continue on the study drug or to get placebo, to have drug withdrawn in a sense. Okay, and the reason that we picked these particular definitions is because having had a bit of a preview about what's to come, I know that those terms are going to come up. Thanks.
So let me turn it over to the back of the room for our polling questions. And a reminder to the folks on the web, switch to your polling tab. So have you or your child ever been involved in a clinical trial for a JIA treatment? Wow. Okay. I think that's a pretty decided answer, so not a whole lot of involvement in clinical trials. Let's go to our second polling question. If you or your child have been involved in a clinical trial, what made you want to participate? What was it that prompted you to do that? Ran out of current options, wanted to help? The doctor recommended the trial? Great. And then the third polling question, please. If you haven't been involved in a trial, and we'll actually be kind of talking about this a little bit more in our large group discussion. So far, lots of people either haven't been asked or weren't a candidate. Fear of placebo. Being stable on other treatments. Okay. Great. All right. Well, thank you. That really gives us a sense for sort of where we are, who's represented in the room and online, so that's really helpful. So let's go back to the slides. And now we're going to hear from our third panel of patients and parents to really focus on clinical trials and their experiences with clinical trials and their thoughts and insights. So first we're going to hear from Rochelle, and again, just like the prior two panels, we'll go 1, 2, 3, 4, and then we'll have our large group discussion. So Rochelle?
So first I have to say thank you to everyone in this room for hanging in this long. This has been a very long day. My name is Rochelle Lentini, and I actually have rheumatoid arthritis myself. I joke that I caught it from my children. But really, I'm here today to talk to you about my family. My husband and I have 2 children. One is 21, and the other one is going to be 19 on Sunday. Our oldest son, he began with enthesitis related at 16, and by 18, 19, the doctor said, nope, I think he's good, he's doing great, in remission. We're doing good. Our youngest son, Parker, he actually began having symptoms at 8 years old, and he's who I'm going to talk to you about because he's been involved in clinical trials. When he was 8, he began with some fevers, this rash that would move around on his body, incredible pain, and a little bit of joint swelling, but to us, we never noticed it, and the doctors didn't notice it. Our primary doctor kept telling us, go to the ER, over and over, probably about 9 or 10 times. We went to the ER. By the time we get there, no rash, no fever, like we made the whole thing up. It literally took us 1 year and 7 months to get a diagnosis. From that point on, it took another 5 to 6 months to get the correct diagnosis, and he was diagnosed with systemic onset juvenile arthritis. In addition to that, he has hypogammaglobulinemia, which is an immune deficiency, and he has overlapping syndrome, so he has a lot of bits and pieces of autoimmune diseases. His current doctor says that we lost way too much time in the beginning in getting the appropriate diagnosis for him, and ever since then, we've been chasing the disease, and it is really mean. In the beginning of his journey, it started in elementary school, and he had to be on very high doses of steroids for about 4.5 years. He was in and out of the hospital. The first year after diagnosis, he was in the hospital 14 times. He's had heart swelling 4 times. He's had lung swelling quite a bit, interstitial lung disease, and swollen lymph nodes. Several times they thought he had lymphoma because his lymph glands were so swollen, all of them, actually. I didn't know there were lymphs in the stomach, but there are, or down there. He ended up using a wheelchair for 4.5 years, and by the age of 14, he had to have his first reconstructive surgery on both of his ankles, tibia, and feet. And right after this conference, he's about to have his 5th surgery on his feet. Excuse me. He has 18 medical specialists, and I just feel like his body is broken up into pieces amongst all these doctors. For us, the internal organs is our most concern. However, right now they're under control, and currently his SI joints just keep getting worse and worse and worse, and his spine is starting to fuse. He has been on everything. He's on his 10th biologic, and our biggest concern is that the biologics that he's on only target one area. And for him, we feel like he needs multiple biologics. And so that's one of my thoughts for you all to consider. This has had a huge impact on our life. I'm sure you can imagine. I just recently retired from the university to take care of our son. We were involved in a clinical trial, and he started that trial at 12. Do I really only have 2.5 minutes? Sorry. There's a washout period to a trial, and that is horrible. So when you have no options left because your kid is so sick, you're willing to try anything. So we knew there was a placebo risk. They put him on 80 milligrams of steroids to try to get him through this period of time, and he got placebo. He went into macrophage activation syndrome, and he started having trouble with his immunoglobulins. They were like non-existent. The good news is then he did get drug, and that drug has been the best drug he ever had. It worked for him for 3 years, where all the other biologics he had tried only worked for 3 to 10 months. And when I say worked, we never got close to medicated remission. He still has not even been close, but he definitely had improved quality. One of the things that I would like to have you all to consider is that when you have a child with a life-threatening disease like systemic onset JA, we need more options available, and we would like there to be an expedited review process for these kids, especially the children who have multiple issues. And then the multiple issues are also a concern because then they get excluded from studies. And I just have 2 final things I'd like to say. You know, this is not a one-size-fits-all disease, and so the drugs aren't either. With such limited options, my child is under constant medical care, and in a good month, he has 4 medical appointments, but on an average month, it's more like 8 to 12. Much has been stolen from his childhood, and his wish and my wish, and probably every parent in this room, is that the next generation of children do not have to struggle like this. When he realized he was on placebo, the doctor gave him an out and said he could leave the trial, and Parker said no. He said, I know the cure is not here possibly in my lifetime, but if this can make a difference for children in the future, then I must do this. The biggest impact JA has made on my life is in teaching me how very precious life is. When you've watched your child's clothes be cut off of him to administer life-saving measures, you know that a cure is needed and that it is out there. And as my son Logan says, we just have to find it. Thanks.
Good afternoon. My name is Andrew Curtis. I'm 18 years old and I live in Orange County, New York, with my parents and older brother Jimmy. In a few weeks, I'll be starting my first year of college at Albany College of Pharmacy and Health Sciences, where I plan to pursue my Doctor of Pharmacy degree and get into clinical pharmaceutical research. I was diagnosed at 2 years old with juvenile rheumatoid arthritis. I was an early walker and was always running around with my brother, climbing on anything we could find. But suddenly, everything changed. All I wanted to do was be carried. I refused to walk up and down the stairs. When my mom tried to put my shoes on, I complained that it hurt, and she was getting worried that something wasn't right. My mom took me to our pediatrician, and he listened to what she had to say. He looked at my knees and ankles and thought I had arthritis. My parents were shocked, but agreed with our pediatrician to at least have some blood work done to hopefully rule out the possibility. Unfortunately, within a few weeks, I was being seen by a pediatric rheumatologist and was given the diagnosis of pauciarticular juvenile rheumatoid arthritis. That diagnosis was given in 2003 and is today known as oligojuvenile idiopathic arthritis. JIA is an autoimmune disease and it's made major impacts on my life. I was so young that I don't know what it feels like to live without pain. My family always supported me and encouraged to try new things, and I never gave up. As a result, I graduated high school with high honors. I was a 3-season varsity athlete for all 4 years, as well as the lead euphonium in my high school band. My arthritis has caused my family to change a lot of things to help me. For example, when we go on vacation, they need to think ahead about where we'll go, how we'll travel, when I'll take breaks for me to rest, and how my medication will be transported and kept on the trip. The photo in the middle was taken shortly after my diagnosis. It's a picture of me in Cape Cod on vacation, sitting in a red wagon. The picture alone is pretty insignificant and just a kid in a wagon. But that wagon was a major change for my family. It was a birthday present for my grandparents, and it allowed me to be pulled around rather than carried everywhere, so I could still go to the beach like a normal kid. They knew it would make life so much easier for my parents if they could pull me around rather than just having to carry me everywhere. In the early years of my diagnosis, there were so many specialists to see and so many therapies that I needed that my mom had to stop working to take care of me. It wasn't possible for her to work and take care of me at the same time. She can now work, but only part-time so that she could still take me to all my appointments. While I was looking for colleges, it was very different from when we looked for my brother. For him, it was about programs and how the campus looked and how it felt at home. But for me, every visit involved meeting with the disabilities office, looking at the buildings to find the elevators, and noticing if the paths were hilly and far from classes. Every visit left me wondering, can I actually function in these surroundings? I do believe I found my perfect school, but my selection process was different from that of a typical student. When I was 13 years old, I failed on a biologic, and my parents needed to decide on my next treatment plan. At this point, it was 11 years into my disease, and we were running out of options due to the lack of medications. At this point, it was looking like I'd need to move to infusion therapy, and my parents were hesitant because I was about to start 8th grade and would have to miss a day of school every month for this treatment. My rheumatologist mentioned that there was an upcoming clinical trial for a drug that was formerly only used as an infusion, but now is available as a subcutaneous injection for children. They were worried about allowing me to be in the trial, but they only agreed because they were told it was open label and I would not be receiving a placebo. We were not willing to risk receiving a placebo and having my JIA continue to flare and lead to more joint damage than I already had. We decided to take a chance and I was accepted into the study. Initially, I was followed very closely to monitor me for adverse reactions. This involved regular appointments on a very specific schedule. We had to drive an hour each way to see our rheumatologist and couldn't miss an appointment because that's when I would receive my medicine. While I understand the need to be closely monitored during the trial, it became a burden from time to time. We had to work around a rigid schedule, and as I entered high school, many times keeping my appointment made me miss exams and other school activities because of my absence. I'm still in the study now, and it's been almost 5 years. There are times that I considered withdrawing from the trial because it became more and more challenging to make it and to be able to go to the appointments on specific dates. I stayed in the study because of how much the medicine was working, and the drug was finally FDA approved last May. They continue to follow me in the study, and I'm happy to know that my experience helped other kids get access to this medicine. But if you look at the photo to your left, my right, it's a collage. The big picture is me in my first day of 8th grade, 1 month before the trial started. And every picture since is a school photo. That's how long I've been in this trial, and that's how long every other kid's had to wait for the availability of this medicine. It seems like a very long time for approval. Well, and I wish that it could have came out sooner for the other kids that were running out of options and couldn't find anything. I'm so grateful to have had the opportunity to be in this study, but I still feel bad for the kids who fail on medicines and ran out of options like I was. My greatest wish is that we could change the way clinical trials are done to meet the needs of the patients. It wasn't always easy for me to get to my appointments, and I was lucky that my medicine was helping, but I feel that 5 years is almost too long for other kids to wait to have this medicine. We need a process to allow medicines to get to the market faster, because not every kid has the same type of arthritis, and not every medicine is going to work for every kid. We need more options, and we need them now. My hope is that future kids will have the best medicine available to them when they're diagnosed, so they can get into remission quickly and live the most productive lives they can. I'm almost 18 years old. I'm only 18 years old, sorry. Just turned 18. I'm 18 years old, and I have permanent joint damage in my ankle and jaw. Next summer, when my friends are looking for summer jobs or hanging out, I'll be undergoing reconstructive jaw surgery to correct the damage that my juvenile idiopathic arthritis caused to my jaw. At this point in my life, I can't help but wonder if we had better medicine in 2003, what my outcome could have been. Thank you for allowing me to share my story.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Harley Powell. I'm 21 years old. I'd like to thank you all for attending this extremely important panel event, and I would only like to command just a moment more of your time. I was diagnosed with JIA when I was 2 years old. As a matter of fact, I was diagnosed with juvenile rheumatoid arthritis, and I remember that only recently did the terminology change to become JIA. We have been searching since I was first diagnosed for a treatment that would put my arthritis in remission. It's been difficult to find a combination of medicine that would both suppress my pain and that consisted of bearable side effects. And we haven't succeeded in remission, but I think we've all finally found a medical regime that works well after 19 years. But it's been really rough for everyone. And I say this all to you because 19 years is a long time. And you might all forget that I was a child for most of it. Children are limited both in their options for medical treatment and in the ways that they can focus their energy. They can either focus their energy on school or on their diagnoses, and it is very difficult to balance both. That is why the gathered members of the FDA here and the pharmaceutical representatives and the patients and families living with JIA must continue to participate in an open dialogue about next steps to take. Because I know that children don't have to be limited in their option for treatment. It's just up to all of us to find the answer. What needs to be understood is currently there's a dire and pressing need for more accessibility to new and developing drugs that are currently undergoing clinical trials and that children can have access to. Treatments that children currently have access to without being in a clinical trial are still disruptive to their schedule and are sometimes a burden to bear when you consider that they are only children. For many years, the only medications that were at all successful in treating my JAA were administered intravenously. That meant that I had to spend an entire day in the hospital while qualified professionals administered them, and it also meant that I had to regularly be out of school once a month or once every 3 months, as it eventually became. When I was a child, I also had to go off a very responsive medication because it had to be administered through a shot. Both of my parents worked, and they had to give it to me before they left for the day. So that was just the way it had to be, but I did go to school crying every day. Without access to clinical trials and new medication, children and their families are forced to choose more extreme measures. With few options available to me, I underwent a bone marrow transplant in elementary school. I was later told that this was an unconventional, if not an extreme approach to take, but I remember at the time we were hoping that, like any transplant, the clean tissue would take and start producing stem cells in my body that did not have arthritis in them or did not recognize my immune system as a threat. The transplant unfortunately didn't take, and prior to that surgery, I had had a port surgically implanted at the beginning of the transplant process. But that port then became infected several months later. I was rushed to the hospital in the middle of the night because and even after I was released from the hospital, I couldn't leave the house for several months because my immune system was so compromised. Missing months of school at a time, both for that and for my treatment, was not good for the way that I planned my school career because I would preemptively plan to be absent for months at a time, even in the following years when I didn't need to be. The middle school that I attended only had one working I will come back to that point, but first I need to say, having arthritis changes the way that you interact with the world. Joint damage can occur frequently and often, and for a very long time, my hips were so damaged that it caused me great pain to walk. I used a mobility scooter at school, but that posed its own problems. The middle school that I attended had only one working elevator in the entire building. It was split between the 7th grade classes on the first floor and the 8th grade classes on the second floor. And every day, regular as clockwork, the elevator would break when I needed to go back upstairs after lunch for Spanish class. Eventually, the school got sick of calling a repairman in every day, so they moved Spanish class down to the first floor. Everyone in the class knew that they had to move it because of me. I can't explain to you how embarrassed I felt. I wanted to melt to the floor. And it was completely conspicuous to everyone else that every day I was absent was a day that Spanish was held on the second floor. I could see that school was different from my younger sister when she passed through the same middle school. And when I saw that, it became abundantly clear to me that a gap exists between children and teenagers who are diagnosed with JIA and those without such diagnoses. And that gap needs to be closed. Personally, I waited upwards of 5 years for a medicine that's working fantastically for me now. And of course, there's a reason for caution, and every medicine needs to be monitored and regulated. But I don't understand why I had to wait 5 years, and it seems to me I could have avoided a lot of pain if I didn't have to wait that long. As a patient, I know better than anyone how important it is that we make sure drugs are safe and effective, especially concerning children. And that can take time. But it needs to be balanced against the pressing need of the ticking time clock as patients who have run out of options are anxiously awaiting access to these therapies. To the pharmaceutical companies, I would ask for consideration of delivery method in age groups and how difficult some delivery methods can be depending on the age of the patient. To the FDA and the pharmaceutical companies, I would ask for greater access to clinical trials for children. One way that this can happen is through more open/exclusion criteria so that more kids are able to be included in trials. But another way is by partnering with us, the patients and the families, to design clinical trials that are easier for us to participate in. I don't mean to suggest that children don't already have access to clinical trials. We just heard the previous panelist suggest that, he said affirmatively that he was at panel. So I'm really happy that that's happening. It's already happening, and that's fantastic. But I would love some more of it. Thank you very much.
So, hello everyone, my name is Vince Del Gaiso. I live in New Jersey, and I want to thank everybody for organizing this meeting and giving me the opportunity to talk to you a little bit about clinical trials. A lot of people know about my son and what he has gone through. He has also experienced a clinical trial, and I'll talk to you a little bit about it today. So the picture of the 3 children, those are my 3 children, and yes, they're triplets. And the person all the way on your left is my son, who was diagnosed with systemic JAA. So this picture was taken probably about 2 or 3 weeks after his diagnosis. And just to go over his diagnosis very, very quickly, he was really, really, really sick. 106 fevers twice a day. Just about every joint in his body was affected. Lymph nodes. You look up systemic in a dictionary, he had this symptom. And that went on for about a month in an intensive care unit where they poked him, prodded, and tried all different kinds of things to see what was wrong with him and couldn't really figure it out. So eventually we got the diagnosis, and at this point we had a very high tolerance for risk. Really, his condition could not get any worse than it was right there, and it just had to stop. Like the way he was not conducive to life. And so we didn't really care what side effects would be. The only thing that mattered to us is the quicker it works, the better, and we don't care about anything else. We stabilized him, and he was well for about 7 or 8 years, and then he had a systemic flare, and this is where the clinical trial comes in. So this systemic flare affected him. Both wrists could not move 1 degree in either direction. His right elbow was locked at 90 degrees. I mean, he literally couldn't straighten it if he had a vice. His shoulder, his knees, he couldn't care for himself. Similar to what Nick was talking about earlier, literally we had to cut his food. He would go to get a drink of water, reach for it, and he couldn't straighten his elbow, so he couldn't get the water, so he would get up, go to the pantry, get a straw, put the straw in the drink, and then take his drink. So he's just kind of figuring out, and these stories are not unique. Everybody here has these same stories. These kids are so resilient and just want to be normal kids. Never once during this time did he ever complain about pain. Never complained about pain. In fact, during this flare, he participated in an ice hockey tournament. And his biggest concern going into the tournament was he also had the rash. And the rash was very, very itchy, and he used to scratch himself until he bled with this rash, and he would cry about the rash. And his concern going to play in a hockey tournament was not that he couldn't move, it was that if he got itchy and he had equipment on, he couldn't relieve his scratch. So he wound up playing, and it was really kind of a display of courage, you know, that all these kids have that I've never seen. So he just decided that he's not going to let the condition dictate what he can do. So what do? At this time, there's no approved treatments for his condition. Medications that are approved for JIA don't really work well with systemic disease, and that was his most important outcome, was to get rid of that rash. So we learned about this study for him to enroll in that was going to help with his systemic manifestations of his disease and his joints and everything else. So at enrollment, we learned about psoriasis. If you have psoriasis, you can't join the study. And my son had been having on and off bouts with psoriasis, and we're going in there saying, please don't let him have psoriasis today so he can participate in the study. So, you know, that just brings me to, like, I understand a little bit about the science with inclusion criteria. You want to control everything so you could see if the thing is working. But I think from my perspective, you're looking for a cohort of patients that doesn't exist. And then when you do prove that it works in that cohort of patient, that patient is nothing like my son. So I still don't know if it works in my son, because my son is nothing like the people that you recruited for this trial. So anyway, get your sheets out, your glossary. So he was put into a randomized, placebo-controlled, double-blind study that also had an open label period after the placebo phase. We enrolled him in this study, and unlike Parker, I enrolled him because I thought this was the best course of action for him. And the greater good, schmader good. My primary role as a parent is to protect my son and to do what's right for my son. The greater good part of it, that's the value add. And my son can do something for the greater good for himself, but I can't make him do something for the greater good for others. I have to protect him. So we went in, he wound up getting drug. He had an immediate response. He woke up the next day, literally 24 hours later, says, wow, I can move my arm again. And then he picks up his shirt and he says, wow, the rash is gone. So it was a really happy ending. I look back on that and I say, wow, if that was a withdrawal trial, I would no way be able to pull that rug out from under him and take that medication away. After he suffered the way he did, find something that works, almost like a tease, and say, no, can't have it anymore. So I would have a really hard time enrolling in a study like that. Now, if that study happened today, I don't know. I would have a hard time enrolling it in a placebo-controlled trial if there's an option available to him, unless the placebo period was really, really short. You know, I guess what I'm trying to say is you guys have a really, really hard job to do. We need quick access to safe, effective treatments, and it needs to be done in an ethical way. I don't have the answers. But what I do think is that a possible solution to this is to have some flexibility and to involve all the stakeholders in designing the protocol. We can't help with everything, but we can help with things like ethics and would we enroll and would we not enroll. And I think that's really valuable information to consider when designing these trials, because they're nuanced, and depending on the stage of the disease you're in, you have a different feeling on what is important to you. So in the beginning, it was just about quickness. I didn't care about risk. Later, it was about getting rid of the rash. And you have to have flexibility to design the study that'll be the best.
Thank you again. Another just amazing panel, bringing to light so many needs, but also so many tough issues. And so thank you so much to all of you. I actually think I might take prerogative and jump to the second question, because in our polling questions, we asked how many folks had been in a trial, why not. I think if we go to question 2, we can kind of get at the same thing. So would you be willing to participate in a clinical trial, whether that's you because you're the young adult who would be in it, or a parent who would enroll your child, and then why or why not? And I think I see someone already ready to answer.
Hi. So for us, this question has come up a lot lately, just between parents and between just even my husband and I, as we know that there are few options for our daughter with SJA. And for us, it's very hard. When she was first diagnosed, she was in the hospital for 2 weeks and didn't move. And watching your kid like that is very hard, especially when they're so little. She didn't move, she didn't talk, she couldn't feed herself. It was a fight to get her to eat 1 meal a day. She was 3 and lost like 17 pounds in the hospital. I mean, that's a lot for a little one. She was barely skin and bones when we got her home. And so for us, the hard part is, would she receive a placebo? And if she does that send us right back to the hospital? Does that put us in a life or death situation? And that's not something I'm really willing to put my kid through. So for us, it would really be whether or not we could be guaranteed that she would not get a placebo.
Thank you for sharing that. And I'm wondering, maybe I should have asked you while you were still up, as a follow-up, sort of what Vincent alluded to, would the length of time matter if it was 5 days of placebo versus a longer time? Okay, that's helpful. And I'm seeing some nods in the room as well. Have another comment?
Hi, my name is Becky. You met my daughter Ellie this morning. The piece of the puzzle that she didn't share with you is that her older brother, who's 2 years older, was diagnosed with enthesitis-related arthritis when he was 4 and she was 2. So for the vast majority of her life, she's only known being the supportive little sister until about 2 years ago when things changed for her. So there was definitely a big shift in the family dynamics for all of us, and obviously for her most importantly. As far as the clinical trials go, both of our kids were very blessed. We live close to Hershey Medical, Penn State Hershey Med Center. So it's a comparatively an easy drive. It's a half day off of work and the kid's out of school early and we have it figured out the day that the doctors are there later, that kind of thing. So we're with doctors that we completely trust and definitely hear us. But this has never been something that's been brought to our attention or posed as a possibility. So I don't know whether some of that's because of the way my kids have presented or the medications they're currently on or what plays into that. But it's definitely something that I think as parents, my husband and I are open to making sure that our kids have an open-minded view of what possibilities are out there, what might be a better option for them. It is very daunting to know where you are in that hierarchy, and as you climb further up towards the quote-unquote end of what's available for your kids, and other people have said this today too, versus their age, where we are in the whole life spectrum, and knowing that you're getting close to the end of what people can do for them at this point. Yeah, we definitely would be open to it, and it's something that I'll probably ask some more about. I'd be curious to see what potential there is for our kids to find some hope for themselves and obviously ultimately to help the greater cause too.
Thank you. Thank you. I think that really aligns with the answer to the polling question. Is it that you're not being asked? Is it not being offered as an option, or is there some reason maybe you're not a fit and so that's why you're not being asked? What is that lack of opportunity piece? So we have another comment in the room.
Okay, so again, I'm Brooke, this is Kate.
Hi.
And Kate has poly and ERA. And so one of the things I would just say, I'm going to let Kate talk about whether she would be willing to be in a trial, but I think for the FDA and for the drug makers, I would say the patient voice is really crucial here, because one of the things that happens to these kids that fail multiple medications is their brain's really powerful, they're really smart, resilient kids, and so they start to develop some aversions to certain things like the smell of alcohol, the color yellow, the numbing cream that comes out. So anytime you're thinking about how to get children and parents interested, you've got to think about that patient voice and the fact that we have experiences that can be valuable in that process that can help that clinical trial be more receptive, not just to the parent and to the doctor, but also to the patient. So I'll let the patient talk.
So I feel like if I were guaranteed that I would not get the placebo, then I would be more likely definitely to participate in a clinical trial, because it would benefit more kids like me and maybe be closer to a cure. But another thing is that the placebo is a really scary thing. Having the chance that you're on no medication and maybe not even knowing that for a while is a really scary thing to think about, especially as a kid. Sometimes it's hard to make your friends understand that I'm having a flare, but don't worry, it was planned for. Yeah.
Right. Thank you so much.
I need to lead off with a question just to better help my understanding of clinical trials before I can answer this one, but it shouldn't take too long. When clinical trials are administered, are they done at specific centers depending on who's doing the research? Is that my understanding?
I'm looking to my research colleagues in the room so that I don't say something wrong, but generally speaking, you're at a study site because that's where, and there could be multi-site studies, but it's a study that's happening somewhere where you are or that you've traveled to be a part of.
Is it particularly limited to sites where there is a dedicated pediatric rheumatologist?
I think it would really depend on
usually.
the study. Okay.
So
Usually.
in this connected age of technology, how can those of us who live 2.5 hours from our center participate in a way that is not totally disruptive to our way of life? Because if that question can be answered, we're on board.
So, Hermine Brunner, I'm a pediatric rheumatologist. We have met, right?
Yes, we have
clinical
met.
trials are all listed on clinicaltrials.gov. That gives you the opportunity, even if your doctor is not educating you about a certain trial opportunity, to go there to see which trials are available.
Mhm.
Now, which trials are available depends a little bit on what medications have been found to be successful in adults. Going back 50 years,
Okay.
children with arthritis got medication for 30 years and they were given with confidence like gold. And it turned out that it only gave side effects to the kid and had no effects on the health of the children at all. For that reason, we need to be careful when we just give medication hoping that it works. I think we need to be cognizant of the short-term, but especially long-term side effect. Remember these first oral contraceptive pills? They caused cancer later on in life. So in the offspring of the ladies who took the medication. So we need to be careful and have a control group somehow.
Sure.
I fully agree that this control group, has to be, that whoever gets placebo, it needs to be very patient-centered. And at no time a patient can be at major risk. And preferences always need to be considered. And whenever you or any family or any patient participates in a clinical trial, it says in the consent form, if you don't want to do it anymore, you are free to go away and stop with the whole trial. Many of the trials in juvenile arthritis at the current time, they are designed with a long-term extension study. That was mentioned a little bit earlier, the 5 years on the study. And the reason for that is being done is because sometimes it takes a long time until one has enough evidence to say with confidence that medication is safe and effective in children with arthritis. And this long-term extension is done to make sure that children who might have been exposed to placebo and benefit from the medication have long-term access. That's done for ethical reasons, not to keep patients going backwards and forwards to the study site. At any time, a patient is allowed to stop. Here at Cincinnati Children's, where I work, we have patients who have been on a study for 6 years. But they come in every couple of months and make sure they are saved on the not approved medication yet, but they have access free of charge.
Sure.
So we need to weigh the benefits, but knowing about a study is best done in clinicaltrial.gov, and many of the pharmaceutical companies, they will pay for study patients to drive or reimburse you for time and expenses.
But that doesn't necessarily cover time lost to your employer, other family considerations. You see what I mean?
Yes,
We
yes.
live in a very, very connected age. It's 2018. We should be able to make this work with so many hospitals across the country.
Yes.
I live in Peoria, Illinois. We have the Children's Hospital of Illinois, which is a fantastic facility. They just lack pediatric rheumatology. I feel if you have a center that's close to you that might be able to collaborate with an administering center of the trial, we already have a hard enough time with people getting access to pediatric rheumatologists. Let's not make the trials even more difficult.
Fully understood. But on the other hand, when you have a very severe disease, you also want to make sure that if a child gets an experimental drug, that child is safe. Imagine you have an infusion reaction, it's a bad one. You want the child to be in a safe place.
Sure.
So one needs to weigh. And,
So perhaps a vetting process then for the facility?
Yes, and there needs to be a pediatric rheumatologist specialist who knows what she or he is doing to make sure that the benefits of the drugs are appropriately assessed. You heard a couple of patients going to the emergency room for months and years, and the arthritis not being recognized. So by the same token, such a doctor may not be able to recognize the benefits or the detrimental effects, and that would be scary.
True, it's a complicated issue.
I want to make 2 quick points, and I know we've got some comments from the webinar, so I'll go to you first and then the webinar folks. I want to just kind of capitalize on something Hermina just said, or reiterate it, is a point just to inform our conversation that there is the option to drop out of a trial. So if something was not going well, you wanted to drop out. Another important piece, and it would totally depend on the study, is that placebo doesn't always or necessarily mean no drug. It might mean that you're on what's called standard of care, like methotrexate, or you're on NSAIDs or prednisone or something. You're just not on the study drug. You're not on the biologic that's being tested. So I don't know if that changes what people would contemplate, whether that would make you more willing, but it doesn't always mean there's no drug. It might just mean it's absence of that test drug. Just want to make sure that's clear. Now we'll go to you, and then we'll go to our webinar comments.
Just kind of to piggyback, I'm not as familiar with clinical trials. Our rheumatologist hasn't discussed that with us or talked about what options were available. I don't know where the closest uveitis specialist is to us in the Midwest. To know if there's currently clinical trials going on with that. One thing that I did want to ask, I guess, and I don't know who can answer the question, once a drug, my curiosity is, once drugs are deemed effective and being FDA approved, where's the panel that discusses with the patients and the parents, kind of in related to how children react to color, smell, feel, that kind of thing. We just recently went on the new pediatric formulation of our biologic, and I had to spend 20 minutes convincing my child this medicine was different, that it wasn't going to hurt anymore, because the injection looked exactly the same as the one that she screamed through for 30 minutes before, during, and after getting that biologic. So something, I mean, when you are administering to children, somebody has to ask those questions on, okay, they're on the adult formulation, we're now making a pediatric one. Is it smart to make that needle look exactly the same? That packaging? Red, I don't know how many people have told me, doctors don't wear red because children, pediatric doctors don't wear red or that kind of thing because children respond to that as a bad thing. The injection she receives, the plunger is red. I mean, these are just things that, are they taking these into consideration during the trials or after trials? Who's having those conversations with parents and children to help minimize even that anxiety effect when children are getting these new medications? And then on top of that, shots. Yes, our kids get used to shots, they get used to blood draws, but the only drug that has an oral actual pill is the methotrexate that I'm aware of. Everything else that I've been exposed to has been only an injectable option. And when she was 3 years old and couldn't swallow pills, the alternative was either the injection into her arm or orally taking the injectable medicine, which they said tastes terrible. I mean, these are the kinds of things that our kids, when they're really little, getting these medications, somebody's got to start thinking about this on how do we get the right medication into their bodies in the most effective way to guarantee they're getting all of the medicine and in a way that's not going to cause them additional mental turmoil and stress and anxiety. I guess are my questions.
Yeah, so I promise we didn't plant her in the audience because that's literally, you are at the essence of why we need to partner. So we need patients and parents at the table with drug makers and the FDA, not in the kind of the way you described it was sort of at the end, once something is developed. We want it at the beginning. So what are the targets that you care about? What do you want out of a treatment? What should it look like? How can it be administered? I won't get into the science, but part of the challenge with oral meds right now is a lot of the drugs that are very complicated and fancy can't be oral yet. I don't know if they ever will be, but they kind of have to be a certain way. That doesn't mean we can't all get together and figure out what's the best way to deal with what we have. So you just teed up that partnership beautifully. That's why we want to all be in the same room on the same page right from the beginning. So let me take comments from the webinar, and then I'll come to you.
Okay, thank you, Suze. So most of the comments have definitely reflected what's being said here in the room. We had one parent say that yes, they would do anything they could to help their child. There are concerns about what happens if the child really goes downhill once they start the study. What's the exit plan? What would happen there? Also, looking at interruption to daily life. What are we going to have to do to participate in this study? Is it already going to, is it going to disrupt life more than this disease already does?
Thank you. That definitely resonates with what we're hearing in the room. Thank you. So we'll go to you, and then I know we have a question from the panel too.
Sure. I think when I sit back and I listen to the panel and then the questions that are brought up by the parents here and the questions from the webinar, I see it resonating around lack of knowledge more than anything on whether, I don't know when trials are happening was mentioned. I don't know where trials take place was mentioned, and I don't know how trials are done was mentioned. So it seems to me like we have an educational issue here. And the second item that comes to mind really plays off of what Vincent said. Vincent said, I'm going to put my son in this trial because we're at the end. And it's very easy as a parent to be motivated about jumping into a trial when you're at the end. So I think if we maybe entertain the idea as a partnership between pharma, the Arthritis Foundation, doctors, and those of us that are involved, parents, together in a partnership, really introduce kind of a shift, a paradigm shift in the way we look at clinical trials. A statement was made earlier today that doctors sometimes don't get it, that good enough isn't good enough. And so maybe that's the time that we start to talk to patients, and we talk as patients and as parents with doctors and big pharma. That's the time that we start to think about trials with our children, not when we're at the end of the rope like Vincent was, but when we're right at that point where good enough isn't good enough. Because then that margin of error, that possible placebo effect that may, or placebo result for one of our children isn't from at the end to where we can't come back, but from not really good enough to where we can certainly catch them in a net. So maybe we need to change the way we look at trials, when we do it, and a little bit on how we do it, but certainly a partnership between all of us that are in this room to educate all of us about what the outcomes can be, what the safety nets are, the fact that we can pull our child out of a trial at any given time, and possibly get us all thinking about this differently.
Great, thank you so much. Do you want to?
Yeah, I just wanted to make the comment about this, that if there's a drug that can be successful in a trial like we had, and the numbers aren't there, then what happens with FDA approval? Like the drugs trial was successful, but there's not enough children because it's a rare disease. So if you could.
I don't know if there's an answer to that, but it's another issue when you have rare diseases and so smaller numbers of kids, and so you can't, there's literally not enough people to get in the study to get a drug approved. I don't know that anyone has answers, but that's yet another thing we have to partner and collaborate on to tackle, but it's a challenge. Absolutely. And then you can be our last comment on this question, and then we'll go to our final question.
I was just wondering, for somebody like myself who is kind of at the end of her road with medications, and being an adult with JRA essentially, if a clinical trial for a new JIA drug would be something I could be able to consider. I know in the past, when I would be put back on drugs that I was on as a child, as an adult, my body reacted differently. So I also think something to consider is when developing these drugs for JIA, to consider that the more, the older they get, the more their bodies change, they might react a little bit more differently as they go on into adulthood than they were as a child.
Yeah, it's an interesting point, and certainly we know that kids are not just small adults, so there's very different things going on, so it's an important issue. I'm going to go to our last question, maybe. There it goes. And this has come up already. I mean, we heard about, we've got the internet, why can't we figure out how to be connected? How can it take less time out of our lives? We heard about a little more comfort if there's a placebo, make sure that's a short period of time, or we could escape the trial if we needed to, if something bad was happening, or maybe it's that you want to know what you're getting and not be randomized or not be blinded. We've heard a couple of these things. We've got, gosh, about 3 or 4 minutes. I'm wondering if there's anything else that jumps out at you when you think, what would make me really likely to participate in a trial? I think in the polling question, we certainly saw if I trust my clinician and my clinician trusts this study, that's definitely going to give me a vote. Oop, I see a hand up. Scholarship money, is that what you said? You might have to explain. Money to be able to facilitate your involvement in the trial?
Just the possibility of scholarship money for college if they participate in the trial, if some scholarship money were available for something like that for an older patient.
That gets a little complicated with how the ethics rules work, but I think, but incentives to be in a trial, or reasons that make it compelling beyond just the trial itself. Again, we won't get into a lot of bioethics, but Liz, do you have a point?
Well, just to kind of go back to some of what Vince said, I think I would encourage my kids who are young adults now to participate if they were permitted to participate with more than one disease. Emily has multiple, Sophie has 2, so they're excluded from most trials before they can even get a foot in the door. So if we can look at that issue a little bit differently.
I think that has really come up loud and clear here today, the inclusion-exclusion criteria. How can we think about those differently? Is there a way we can include more people so that we generate more knowledge about, I think Vincent said that as well, about knowing our unique responses. We have a couple more comments over here, okay?
It would make me more willing to do a clinic trial if I was able to be walked through the process and know what would happen, like have a plan A, a plan B, like know exactly what would happen before I get myself into it.
That's great, good idea.
Ellie stole my thunder. So I was going to say the same thing. So my daughter is 6, and when we go to our rheumatologist and they explain what the different options are available, even though they try to explain it at her level, a lot of times she just wants to click the little toy that's hanging around the stethoscope. She's not 100% there in focus. And then, of course, they come to me, and I'm trying to get her to listen while I'm listening. But the control group, absolutely, considering the fact that something like SJIA, which is what my daughter suffers from, is such a unique form, and is it autoinflammatory or autoimmune, and there's all these different debates and negotiations. That scope of that control group for that particular group, it can be so large. It's just making it broader and then explaining to her and me and making sure that we have more than just WebMD to review. There's a lot of scholarly articles out there that some of us who are still in the academics might have access to, but the average person doesn't. And getting that information to us as parents will help us make those informed decisions.
That's great. And I think, yes, absolutely. I think the Arthritis Foundation and CARA both have, we provide some of that information, certainly something we can do more of and make sure it's targeted and get information into the hands of the folks who really need it and want it. Let me do one quick check on the webinar, folks. Do we have any other comments?
Yeah, we just have one comment on this last question about if you could be guaranteed that the placebo would also be something helpful that would make the decision easier.
So there is something called an active comparator arm where you really don't use a placebo, you're testing drug versus drug. And so I think we definitely want to kind of we'll take note of that comment and write it down. And that actually reminds me to make sure I say, today is just the beginning of this conversation. And so we've started, we did the survey, we've had focus groups, now you've all participated. Please reach out to us, email us. We're going to have an email address at the very end of the slide deck. You can find us all in numbers of ways, phone, email, however, and keep sharing these ideas and thoughts, because this is how things will get better. This is how we will make progress.
Good afternoon. Thank you all for inviting me to share some closing remarks with you today. My name is Rachel Glazer, and I'm a clinical team leader in the Division of Pulmonary Allergy and Rheumatology Products at the FDA, and I'm also a practicing rheumatologist. DPARP is the division that oversees drug development for rheumatic diseases, including JIA. My colleagues from the FDA and I are honored to have the opportunity to be a part of this patient-focused drug development meeting that has brought the JIA community together to advance the development of new treatments for the disease. I would like to thank all of you who braved DC traffic and the challenges of travel, and thank those who couldn't attend in person but participated remotely on the phone and on the webcast to share your powerful stories with us. We recognize it takes time, effort, and courage to talk about your experience with the disease. Thank you all for being part of this meeting and sharing your experiences with us. This patient-focused drug development meeting is a unique opportunity for the FDA to hear from patients, caregivers, and family members about the impacts of JIA on their lives. The perspectives and insights you have shared allow us to approach our roles with insight into the complex needs of the JIA patient community. Patients are often experts in their condition. The ability to hear what patients with JIA care about can help us understand what aspects of the disease are most important to patients, as well as understand how patients view the benefits and risks of therapies and devices for JIA. This knowledge can then help facilitate development of future treatments. Today's meeting was a demonstration of the important perspective of the patient. You have all identified a lot of key issues today. Many of the themes I heard today were common to many of the stories, but I also appreciated that each person has brought their unique experience and perspective, which made the discussions even more powerful. The first key theme I heard today was about the loss of one's quality of daily life related to JIA. Some of this included even routine activities like dressing oneself or your choice of clothing, difficulty making it through a school day or being able to take the SAT, and difficulty driving. JIA has had a significant impact on activities that people enjoy, such as the ability to participate in sports and other extracurricular activities, the ability to participate in social events with one's friends, and also has an impact on the activities of caregivers and, as we heard several times, of siblings. Additionally, we heard about the impact on daily life, and there were a lot of differences, but also commonalities in terms of the impacts on personal life, professional life, social life, and emotional impacts as well. We heard about feeling helpless, both from the patient side as well as the caregiver perspective, the impact of the unpredictability of the disease, the sense that JIA is an invisible disease, and the feeling different than one's peers. In today's discussion, there was an emphasis on symptoms, and I thought it was very moving to hear how these symptoms impacted one's quality of life. The main symptoms that were discussed today were pain, functional limitations, and fatigue. Recognizing and understanding how these symptoms overlap and interact and how they can be distinct was very helpful for us to hear. One early panel member mentioned that she uses the term her child's own version of JIA. And I thought this statement highlighted sort of the individual nature of the disease. There was also some fear expressed about not knowing what tomorrow will bring. One panel member spoke of feeling like she was living in a domino setup, and several people spoke of the need to be careful about how they expend their energy and the need to plan around their treatments and both their good days and their bad days, and that after even good days that they may pay for that later. We heard about the importance of support from family and friends to help with some of these issues, and the impact on the whole family, and even extending beyond the family to employers who may need to consider a patient's JIA in their plans.
We also heard about therapy considerations, including insurance and financial burdens. We heard about the need for infusions, which are associated with pain, and difficulties with IV access for those infusions, and the need to plan for their appointments around school and work. We also heard about other side effects of treatments. And while there are some therapies available that are helpful for patients living with JIA, there's a high unmet need for more safe and effective therapies. We heard several times about the limited therapeutic options for certain disease manifestations, particularly TMJ and uveitis today. At least one person mentioned differences in the definition of success between the medical community and the patient, and that sometimes improvement is just not good enough. And we heard about the number of therapies that patients have tried and the fear of running out of treatment options and feeling like they're at the end of the line and their last option. It was noted that treatments are needed to manage daily symptoms, functional impairment, fatigue, and preventing joint damage and disability. There were also discussions on the complexity of risk and benefit for such therapies, and also the risk of discontinuing treatment when patients are doing well. In summary, today's meeting was a very important dialogue, and as Suze alluded to, we hope that this will lay the foundation for future conversations. As FDA continues striving to incorporate the patient perspective more broadly into medical product development, meetings such as this help enhance our understanding of the patient's perspective and assist in moving the science of patient input forward. This input is valuable for FDA's drug review because it helps provide the underlying clinical context about the severity of the disease and the currently available treatments that is necessary to take into account when assessing whether a drug's benefits outweigh its risks. This kind of dialogue is extremely valuable not only for FDA, but also industry, academia, and other medical product developers in the room and on the web. The perspective shared today can help stakeholders identify areas of unmet need in the patient population, identify or develop tools that assess benefit of potential therapies, and also raise awareness and channel engagement within the patient community. With a growing appreciation for the benefits that patient-focused involvement can provide to patients, drug developers, and regulators, there's an increasing need to strengthen and expand the linkages with patient groups into the earlier stages of discovery and the drug development process. Patient involvement enables new opportunities as different partnerships begin to develop within an evolving research and development enterprise. Once again, thank you for your participation and for sharing with us today.
And finally, I'd like to invite Dr. Guy Eakin and Dr. Laura Schanberg up to the stage to provide the closing remarks.
And the first thing I want to say is that we just heard from the FDA a really wonderful transparency that says that they have leaned in, they have heard what's been said today, and taken that into their own organization. So that's a wonderful opportunity to note success in this meeting. So I very much appreciate the very active listening that's been offered by the various professionals who have come to this meeting. So I do want to thank the number of people who have joined us from really all walks of life. On the patient side, those who have come from near and far have participated in focus groups, have participated in surveys, have participated in the polling, on the webinar, here in this room, all just an incredible wealth of experience. Certainly we appreciate the participation of the FDA as well as other industry partners. And I think we can all walk away and say that if you've ever received the answer from someone that a patient is not an expert, then I think we can all say right now that it's very apparent that that person was working on the wrong question. And it's just been tremendously insightful today to hear the number of ways that a question that we might think of as being perhaps obvious is nuanced by the people who are actually living with the disease. So what happens? Now this meeting is not an end unto itself. This has to reflect an ongoing partnership between our organizations. So the outcomes of this meeting will be written into a Voice of the Patient report. But we're in a place where we feel that this role is not finished, and we encourage and expect that all of the academic and professional researchers will seek to incorporate patient-level insights at all stages of study design, certainly including the execution, design, and interpretation of the data that comes out of those studies. Right now, as we, reflect on the day that we've had, I think, one of the things that really strikes me is that, what we've done here today is we've really checked in on an evolving concept of what benefit is and what acceptance of risk is for a patient community. And we're evolving that concept that treatment, is not just taking care of bodies, but supporting goals that are co-produced between patients and the healthcare community. And if we're supporting those goals and not just fixing the mechanism, that we're preventing those dominoes that Angie mentioned early on, and that we really have to do this and support those goals, those patient-level goals, because as we heard, even when we get something as rigorous as a diagnosis seems, we heard today that diagnosis may shift, there may be multiple diseases that are used to describe even a single patient. And those diagnoses may change, but that burden disease that Kirsten and Corinne described as being pervasive or constant, but paradoxically unpredictable, that still remains, and that's where our research needs to go. So, how do we continue this network? Everybody around a table, is there probably with people you didn't know at the beginning of the day. We hope you'll be continuing through the Juvenile Arthritis Conference. We hope that you'll take part in some of the tools that the Arthritis Foundation and CARA and other partners are creating. For instance, the Arthritis Foundation's Live Yes network, which offers a number of volunteer opportunities. We talked, there was a mention earlier about clinicaltrials.gov. We're about to launch in the next month or so, a reskinning of the data from clinicaltrials.gov that makes it a little easier to find rheumatic disease clinical studies. That'll be on the Arthritis Foundation website. But more importantly than anything else, we're here to remember now after the conversations today that patients have so much to offer in terms of clear opportunities to engage in the recruitment and design of clinical trials, consideration of the ethics, the wealth of research that's necessary to understand the unpredictability of the disease, but if addressed, then that would translate so powerfully to the benefit side of that risk-benefit equation. And on the acceptance of risk side of that equation, we've had such a nuanced conversation today about the context under which risk might be acceptable to a patient population. So I'd want to take a moment, certainly again, to thank everybody, but particularly call out a few people in the room, the planning committee that really made this day possible. And, in particular, our inimitable, irreplicable, MC, Suze Schrant. So what I'd like to do is I've tried to summarize for both of us based on our conversations. Laura, would you have anything else you'd care to add?
Just mention something about partners.
Okay, so early in the day, you might have heard this word, the Partners Network. So this is a wonderful consortium of many of the different disease foundations and academic researchers, CARA, PR Coin, Cure JEM, Lupus Foundation of America, all working together to associate patients with research opportunities, and also developing a network of opportunities for creating what's called a learning health system. So if you're here for the rest of the JA conference, you'll hear more about that. But any other questions, if we're going to run out of time here to describe it more fully, but certainly I want to invite anyone who has lingering questions to never hesitate to reach out to us at any way you can get in touch with the Arthritis Foundation, but certainly in the science department at afscience@arthritis.org. So with that, I just want to say thank you and say that we're on the cusp of what, if you're staying, this is this wonderful moment where it's the calm before the storm. These soft walls are going to disappear. This room is going to get even bigger, and there's going to be, 800-something families here networking together, learning from each other, and really, most importantly, educating this whole network about how to ultimately cure, conquer, put a stake in the heart of this disease.